Welcome, 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 welcome to another episode of Unscripted. I wanted to hop on the mic today and come and spend time with every one of you because of a couple things that were on my heart, some butt kickings that I took yesterday. I got a chance to be able to go up to Fresno and speak to a graduation, which was incredible. I got to the airport and there were some patterns that I had seen when we went the last time about a year and a half ago with my son, Maddox. There was a couple patterns, and one of the patterns was that our flight was delayed. We started to see it get delayed, and so I not panicked, but I looked at it and I said, hey, what I'm going to do, son, is we're just going to take off and we are going to go and drive home. Well, we drove home, and we ended up getting home at the exact time that the flight would have got home, so it was no different. But the one thing that I learned was I took a phone call. And I'm going to be talking about that here in the episode. Another thing that's been on my heart is small business and the leadership culture and systems of a small business, and the permission to try, which is a thing that my parents gave me, and we're going to be talking about that. And then the last one is going to be iterations. And these are heavy on my heart. I've been having conversations about them, and I'm so excited to bring them to you today. So I hope you enjoy another episode of Unscripted.
Cause we believin', it's for certain. We put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never known, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.
The way I see it is you've got two choices. You can either keep pretending like nothing bad's ever gonna happen to you, and then when it does, you're saying, uh-oh, or you can get ahead of what's coming so that when it does, not if, you're ready for it. And you're sitting pretty, sipping on Mai Tais next to the pool, working on that Caribbean suntan, because you got it covered. So folks, it's time for you to learn the truth about money. It's time for you to take back control of your money so that you are ready for what's about to happen. By doing that, you're setting yourself up for absolute success. No matter what comes your way, you're ready for it. And that's what I want for you, and I want to help you with that. So go to chrisnaugle.com and sign up for the Wealth Webinar. We do them every Wednesday at 1 p.m., and you need to be there because it's time.
For over 90 years, we've been crash testing our cars in the tireless pursuit of automotive safety. At Volvo, safety's been first since 1927. We've saved millions of lives with the invention of the three-point seatbelt in 1959. At Volvo, we've made driving safer for you and them. Visit safety.findlayvolvo.com to learn more.
So they say if you give a man a gun, he'll rob a bank. But if you give a man a bank, he'll rob everybody. The good news for you is Private Money Club runs solely on peer-to-peer relationships, which means no banks allowed. So finally, there's a community for real estate entrepreneurs where it is truly a win-win solution. This community is a place where you can connect with other lenders and other borrowers, and the end result's massive growth for you. You get to build your real estate empire, and you get to do it solving other people's problems. So if that sounds like a place you want to be, well then join us. Go to privatemoneyclub.com/Kelly. And if you want $500 off, just add the code Kelly500 and I'll knock $500 off the Premier membership. We'll see you on the inside.
So my son Maddox, as a lot of you know, is 12 years old. And I got a call from one of my very good friends, Deanne Evans, who owns the Paul Mitchell School in Fresno, California. And she reached out and said, hey, I would love for you to come and speak at the graduation for our future professionals. And last year in June, I got a chance to go with my son to Fresno. And we had such an amazing time, and we went into the airport. We were ready to go, and my son was so excited, and he got to the airport, and he looked, and he's like, Daddy, look. And I said, what? And he said, we get to go through security. And I looked at him, I was like, man, I guess I never looked at security that way, but now I do. And so we went through, and then we sat down on the plane. He's like, Daddy, we get to have snacks. And then we were on the plane. He was like, look, they got Wi-Fi. He was so excited about every single thing. And then he got there, and Deanne took him and got some Chick-fil-A. And so my son has been going crazy about Fresno ever since for a year and a half. So when I got this call from Deanne about speaking at her graduation yesterday at Fresno, my answer was emphatically yes. I don't even care the time, the date, whatever it is, I'm in. And she asked, can you bring Maddox? And I said, oh my goodness, so amazing. So I went home, I asked him, and he was like, Fresno, Daddy, we're going. It's in. He got a new suit. He got a new Biggie shirt. He put on his chunky dunks. He was so excited. And we got a chance to go, and it was unbelievable. Well, a little unbeknownst to me, when I booked it, I didn't realize that it was the 2-year anniversary of my pops graduating to heaven. And some people look at me like, oh, that's why you have a smile on your face, because that's what my pops worked for his entire life. And so with him working his entire life for something, and then him actually being able to get it, and plus I know that he's walking on streets of gold with my mama, it was incredible. But to be able to share that time with my son yesterday and do exactly what I love and what I'm purposed to do, speaking, keynote speaking, and, for companies, organizations, and events like I got to yesterday, it was unbelievable. I shared this time with him, got to share with the audience. Everything went well. And then, like a bonehead, we got in the car. We were driving back because our flight got delayed. And so we drove back from Fresno to San Diego last night. And I get in the car, and I take a call from one of my friends. Now, my friend is very important to me. I love him so much. But I got on the call, and we stayed on the call for a little bit of time. And I looked over, and my son had fallen asleep. And I wasted the time. Not wasted, because I got to spend a little bit of time with my friend on the phone, but I realized at that point, like, there's some things that you'll never be able to have back. That little bit of time is something that I'll never be able to have back, and I learned the lesson. And then I went into, like a lot of you probably do, I went into this place of beating myself up. I was thinking, man, I shouldn't have flown, or I shouldn't have drove. We should have just flown. I should have spent the time with my son. And then I went back to what my pop said to me. 3 words taken out: coulda, shoulda, and woulda. He said coulda needs to be taken out, because if you could have done it, then you would have. If you should have done it, then you would have. And if you would have done it, then it would have happened. So give yourself some grace, son. And that's what he was speaking to me yesterday, and it was so strong. And I realized that I had made a mistake. I had made a mistake in not spending that time with my son. And that every second with him, I need to be able to soak it up. But also, I needed to give myself grace and listen to my mom with the one word that she would tell me all the time, which was, shit. Like, I have to make it better. So on that next time, you have to make it better. So that's where I want to take you to. And I want to jump right into this, because I want this episode to be as much meat as humanly possible for you, because we're going to be talking about small businesses. Now, my small business, as a lot of you guys know, is, I built up salons all over the country, and we had a very good run, and it was incredible. But I believe that these principles are translatable, and they transcend any small business from the point of $1 million, up to $1 million in revenue and on to $5 million in revenue. All of these, principles that we used, and that's what we built. But I believe that they transcend, and principles transcend circumstance. But most of the time, I had the tendency to look at the circumstance and say, oh, wow, what do I need to do in this time? And what my pops and my mom taught me was coulda, shoulda, woulda. That was a principle-based lesson. And then my mom saying, shit, that was a principle-based lesson. So in that lesson that I learned yesterday, which was principle-based, I started to think about businesses, and I started to think about, in my business, when I gave myself grace, meaning that I gave myself the opportunity to mess up and then write it down and it become my procedure, everything seemed to work out. It didn't work out exactly when I wanted it to, but it would work out for the future. And so as I gave myself more and more grace, I gave myself more and more permission to do this thing that I want you to write down called iteration. And this iteration was one that, if you look at Apple started off with the iPhone 1 and then they got better with the iPhone 2. Some people said they maybe didn't get better with the 3 or the 4 or the 5 or whatever it was, but each time they got a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. But they gave themselves permission to try. And I want to say that probably one of the most valuable things that my parents have ever given me in my entire life, and my brother and my friends and my wife and my kids, they always gave me permission to try. To step out, to try something a little bit different. When I started off with Unscripted, the scariest thing, it wasn't the script that it's unscripted, so I don't have a script. I have a couple points that I want to hit on today, but it wasn't, setting up. It wasn't the production. It wasn't any of those things. You know what it was? Hitting record. And my friend Sean Finnegan told me that your start will always stop you. And it's the start that generally stops entrepreneurs or small business owners on our trek to do better or to iterate, because we have the tendency to say, like, oh my gosh, what if it doesn't work? What if this? What if that? And then we just get paralyzed. Well, what I learned yesterday from my son was, number one, be aware of the challenges and be honest. I had to be honest with myself. I could say, oh yeah, I had to take the call. It was important. No, it wasn't that important. My friend is important, but it wasn't that important. I was sitting with my son. I made a mistake. And some people say there's no failures. Yes, there is. I failed in that situation. Although when you add grace to that equation, then you can start to iterate. And when you iterate, you start to innovate. And when you innovate, then you have to adapt immediately into that situation. And when that happens, you start to move at light speed. And so the first one here with small businesses, understand and know your vision, right? So knowing the vision of it. Now, the cool thing about the vision is you don't have to understand all the steps. Sometimes it's just about starting. And then what it'll do is you'll pile on. You'll try something. It won't work. Write it down. It becomes your systems and processes for the future. If it works, then write it down and then replicate it. But don't fall so in love with the system that you alienate the people. And this is something that I've done in the past. I fell so in love with the system on how it was actually replicatable that I wasn't taking the time to realize that the people could iterate and that they could make mistakes and maybe they could change things or they could make it a little bit better. And once you free yourself to be able to do this, inside of a vision, now that vision becomes malleable. It becomes fluid. We all ultimately know what we want to do within our businesses, but if you take and you say, here's my vision, and then you allow yourself to iterate, you give yourself permission to try, what starts to happen is like incredible, incredible, incredible things. And most of the time it's not going to be exactly the way that you planned. Yesterday did not turn out the way that I planned. I walked out on the stage yesterday at an amazing theater, and my mic didn't work. Well, my mic didn't work at first. I was thinking, oh man, it's a technical issue. You know what the technical issue was? It was that I didn't push the mute button. It was me. It was the operator. And a lot of times with us as humans or as entrepreneurs or business owners, we have the tendency to walk out on stage like I did, have all the technology, and then when it doesn't work, we blame the technology, and then we shrink back and we say, oh man, I need to shrink my systems back. I don't need to move or progress. And for me, it was just the fact that I hadn't pushed the mute button. It was one button when I came off stage, and I actually fumbled around, and then I grabbed another mic, and I didn't even use the cordless one that was on me. But when I went backstage, I looked at it, and the mute button was as big as I could ever imagine. Now, I could hide that or act like it was somebody else's fault, but I had to be honest with it. I had to become aware of it. I had to be honest with it. I had to call it and then add grace to it. When I added grace to it, I was able to add an iteration. And do this with your vision as you go along, and that brings you to your leadership. You see, your leadership will only ever produce probably about 20 or 30%. If you take your leadership, take 20 or 30%, you minus that from what your leadership is doing, and that's what the crew will do. When I say the crew, it's the rest of the people that are being led by that person. This is where leaders get frustrated. They say, man, I'm doing this, therefore all the people that I'm working with or that I'm leading, they should be doing X. And then there's the people that say, well, I walk behind them and then I push them forward and they should be doing better. I could tell you that's all romantic, but it doesn't happen in a business. What happens is if you take the leadership's performance, you minus about 20 or 30%, that's what you're going to get is your cap or your ceiling. So then what I ask is, have you set your leaders up for high performance? Have your systems been put in play to help your leaders to get to a high level? Because you know if you take 20 or 30% away, that's going to be what the rest of the team accomplishes. So when we start to understand these kind of things, then we start to say, oh, wow, okay, now my vision can be fluid. We have to be focused. We have to understand where we're going, yes. But I can tell you this, there is no business owner on the planet that's ever come up with a plan, executed the exact plan, and didn't have any deviation or iterations inside of it. Or at least not ones that I know. So if you are one of those, comment for me and let me know. And then that way, I can get better at it. So when we take the vision, we understand that it's malleable. We understand we need to have the iterations. Then we start to build the leadership. We start to build the leadership based off of what do we want to carry on the vision? Well, the leadership is going to have to carry on the vision. And so we have to really invest in those leaders and realize that the leaders take 20% away. That's going to be the cap or the ceiling for every single thing else inside your company. Now, the leaders, what's going to be crazy about it is the leaders will set the culture. They'll set the culture. They're not going to build it completely, but they'll set what the culture is. Now, people talk about this all the time and say like, oh, my company lacks culture or we need culture. No, every single company in the world, especially small businesses, they all have a culture. Sometimes it's just not intended. And so we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional about the type of culture that we're going to have. And this doesn't come from signs or placards in the back room. What it comes from is the behavior of our leadership. So when it goes back to it, we've got to put systems in play that help our leadership to get to an incredible level, because we know 20 or 30% taken away from our leaders is going to be the cap of what the rest of the crew does. And that's going to set the tone for the culture. Now, the culture is simply understanding the story, being able to tell the story and make it their own. You see, I worked with Paul Mitchell years and years and years ago. And when I started with them, I think I was 19 years old. It was Paul Mitchell's story, and I told it. And then as I started to move through, I started to have my own story that I would add to the story that I was telling about Paul Mitchell. And then there was the time where I met a bearded guy at a IBS show in New York, a beauty show. And when I met him, we joked and we laughed. I didn't know who he was. I was a young kid. Well, he turned out to be the president of Paul Mitchell. Well, I had no idea. His name was Luke Jacobellis. But I had made a friend. I wasn't looking for something, so I got to know him before I ever needed him. And so what started to happen is I started to have my own stories that I owned, and they happened to have Paul Mitchell in them. And so what started to happen is I started to own the culture as opposed to rent it. And that's the question that you want to ask every single time in your business right now. Ask yourself, do the people inside of your company, organization, or inside of your brand, do they own the culture or do they rent it? There's a difference. When you own a home, you knock a hole in the wall. Guess what you do? You fix it. When you rent, you knock a hole in the wall. You wait for the landlord to fix it. Well, see, culture, once it becomes owned, changes everything inside. And most 99% of the challenges that I deal with when I'm working with a company, an organization, or even a person comes back to the culture in which was set. That culture was set by the leadership. The leadership was set by the vision. The vision needs to be malleable. It needs to have a ton of iterations. It needs to have a ton of grace. Leaders need to be set up to win. They need to be communicated to at the highest level and realize that their team is only going to produce 70 to 80% of what they're doing. So we need to set that bar high for that leadership. Leadership is going to set the culture, although the people will live out the culture. And it teeters on the fact of your people either owning or renting that culture. And so let's drop down to systems. This is the part that most people go to right away. Like they ask me all the time, when I come in, I evaluate, take and audit their business. They ask me, what do I need to do to change one of three things? And that's all it is in business, right? It's either that I need to have more recognition. Not many people know about my business. I need to have more revenue, or I need to have more efficiency. When you have efficiency, revenue, and you have market share or awareness of your brand, that's the holy grail. But most of the time we're dealing with one or the other. We're either dealing with we need to have more revenue in, or we've got enough revenue, we just need to be more efficient, or we're efficient, we have enough revenue, but what we would like is we'd like more awareness, which will bring more revenue, and we can know how to be efficient with it. And when they ask me these things, they ask me all the time, what is it that I can do right now? And so they're looking for a system that will change or help their situation. But what I tell them all the time is the systems are a byproduct of the culture. The culture is set by the leadership. The leadership is developed by the vision. And so we always have to go back to that part, and I start to ask about the vision, and they're like, no, just give me the system. Well, a system is nothing more than a list of your screw-ups. And if you're not giving yourself permission and given those iterations that we talked about in the vision to be able to iterate, mess up, give grace, and walk through it, what starts to happen is our systems start to become tight. We start to love our system so much. This is the way that we have always done it, and it's always worked, so I'll just keep doing it. As opposed to saying, you know what? That system that I have written down is because last week I screwed up. You see, I'm making a system in my life because of my time with Maddox. My time in Fresno on the way back home, driving home last night, what I realized was that I need to honor my time with my son. I need to put the phone away, or I need to say, like, I can call you in 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, maybe when he falls asleep on his own after we've talked and we've got excited, but I miss that time. But I've got to be honest with it. I've got to become aware of it, but I got to be honest with it. I got to call it for what it is. Now, I could dance around it. My pops was big on this back in the day. He was like, boy, you could change a word, you make it all fluffy and all those things, but it doesn't change the meaning of the word. So I could say, oh, I didn't fail. I learned a lesson. No, I failed last night. I failed my son, and that's okay. As long as I give myself grace and I say it's time for an iteration. So I write that down and it becomes a system. But if I don't give myself permission to be able to iterate, I don't give myself grace, I never can get to the system aspect of it. And the cool thing is with systems, the culture develops the systems. It'll spit them out. When you give freedom to people inside your culture to innovate and try things, what starts to happen is they try stuff, it works, they write it down, they replicate it, but they don't fall in love with it because they know that they're going to iterate it at some point. They love on the people, but they manage the system. And the system is nothing more than a list of your screw-ups. And as you go and as you build, give yourself that permission. Give yourself that permission just to try. Hey, I'm going to try this out. When I first tried Unscripted, one of my friends, Wayne Freeman, reached out to me and he said, you know what? If it's called Unscripted, you can't have a script. Because the first Unscripted that I did, I actually had a list of all the things that I was going to say. But you got to give yourself the opportunity and the permission to iterate. I want to tell you a quick story. My friend Lynn, I was just taking care of her. I saw her and I started to tell her about replicatable systems. And replicatable systems, although we talked about it before, we don't want to fall so in love with that system that we hold people to it and we just push them through it. We want to manage the system. Know that the system works, but understand and know that it can be iterated at all times. And this gives a result that's predictable. Now, the cool thing is if you have a system that has that can produce a predictable result, it starts to create loyalty. It starts to create trust in the guest. But also, that guest wants to know that you're taking and investing your time in trying something new. And I could tell you this, 9 out of 10 times, when I try something, it sucks. I tried out my community the other day. I just put it out. I was so excited about it. I just put it out. And in my head, I was like, I'm going to put out the community. And what I wanted to do, what I'm doing right now, and I'm building it, it's just going to take time. But when I started, I said, look, what I want to do is I want to meet every single month, or every single week, actually. I'm going to meet every single week. I'm going to take people through. I want to create a coaching program that has very little friction at all. It's a community of people where you don't have to be on screen. You don't have to, be on a Zoom. You can type in your answers. You could watch it either on the live stream and interact, or you could watch it at home. And I thought, when I released this, I pushed the button to release this community. It is going to go ape. And I did it, and there was crickets. But I went back to the fact of what my pops and my mom taught me is there's only 2 secrets to success in any business: hard work and time. Hard work and time. It takes time and it takes hard work. Now, it doesn't mean that, you think that I'm maybe oversimplifying in those things, because we just went over vision, leadership, culture, and systems. But those are all things that you're just going to have to work at. You're going to have to give them time. And you're going to have to learn from my mistake that I made yesterday, my failure that I made yesterday with my son, to be able to step back, calm down, and realize that that thing that you think is so important, when you take a breath, you count to 3, maybe 10, some of us 20, and we really, really evaluate, we could figure out what is really important. And for me, what was really important is my son. Just to spend time with him. So I learned the lesson. Give myself grace. I take the failure, I learn the lesson. Give myself grace. I iterate. It becomes a system. I don't fall in love with the system. I simply manage it, because I know at some point we're going to iterate it again. And when your guests or anyone consuming what it is that you're doing, if it's an offer, if it's a product. And I want to encourage all you small business owners out there that whatever it is, if it's an offer, if it's a product, or whatever it is, if you constantly iterate and you commit to every single one of the people who consume what it is that you're doing, that every single year, every single month, every single week, I will just iterate. I'll take and audit all the systems, I'll look at them, and then I'll just make them better, make it a little bit better each and every single time. And it's amazing, I think, what God could teach you when we start to listen, when we start to become aware of it. And I didn't want to hear it yesterday. I wanted to hear that, when I walked on stage at first, that my mic wasn't working. Oh, technology doesn't work. It was because of me. But now I have a system that I'm going to push the mute button every single time that I walk out on stage. And then when I got in the car and I got the call, I could have looked at the call. I actually made the call. I saw a text message, and then I initiated the call with my friend. But the next time that I look at that text message, I can look at my surrounding area and say, who's important right now? And if I'm with my kids, with my wife, or with my friends, I'm going to say, that phone call can wait. It's hard for me because realizing that you were wrong and then making it better at first, it's very, very, very uncomfortable. But I can tell you this, from 30 years of experience of doing this process over and over and over and over again, it doesn't get any easier. It's just the muscle gets a little bit stronger. And so I want to encourage every one of you out there with a small business. Stop right now, especially around the first of the year. Stop right now. Take into account, what's my vision? What's my vision for as I'm moving forward? Let me check my leadership. How's my leadership performing? Because we know that we take our leadership 20 to 30% Lower than that is going to be what the ceiling is, the absolute ceiling for every single person in the organization. Then I'm going to take a look at my culture and I'm going to say, are there behaviors inside of my environment that I don't agree with or that I don't see that are the most efficient? And then realize that that's your culture. It's not the placards on the wall. And finally, the systems that you have put in play, ease up a little bit. Get out of love with them. Start managing them. Start realizing that, you know what, I'm not going to hold on to this system because a system that is, I was talking to Larry Namer the other day. He said that the challenge with the writer's strike recently was that they just signed a 10-year contract. But they don't know what's going to happen in 10 years because technology is moving so fast. So he said that there should have been areas in the contract open for a little bit of iteration because they're going to be locked into technology today, and technology 10 years from now is going to be completely different. And this is what happens with our systems a lot. We get so locked into it where we're at now, and we don't realize that there's going to be progression. Give yourself the availability and pliability inside your systems for them to constantly get better, and that's where people absolutely fall in love with you. So December 29th, I know none of you have anything to do. You need to check out the Vibe Room. It's coming. It's at the Edison House in Salt Lake City. It's a live version of the podcast. We got Mr. Paul Cardall, one of the most downloaded musical artists of our time. We got Patrick Hummel, the CEO of Table One Hospitality, some of the greatest culinary experiences in the world, and the #1 motivational speaker in the world, Mr. James Dixon, and up-and-coming musical artist Claudia Ryan is going to be playing too at the Edison House, Salt Lake City, December 29th. I look forward to seeing you all there. Mr. Wayne Freeman, I want to thank you. Gino, I love you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate every single one of you. And as always, thank you for sharing. Thank you for listening. And thank you for subscribing if you're doing it on YouTube. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. This has been Unscripted, and I'm officially off the hot seat.